remember standing in front of a display case of ancient Greek pottery, mesmerized by the diversity of their shapes and designs. It was at the National Museum in Athens, and at the time I was just starting to study ancient Greek literature and language. It was hard to see some of the inscriptions on the vases in the case in front of me, and it was also hard to get an idea of the vase's weight and in some cases size. What I really wanted to do was hold them one at a time in my hands. Read the writing on them, look at the pictures, the figures painted on them, get a sense of their wear by seeing the cracks and chips. Look at the parts of the vessel I could not see, like behind them. But I couldn't, right? I mean, they're behind glass for a reason. They are precious physical artifacts from the Neolithic period of Greek history. No curator in their right mind would let the public handle them. I had traveled thousands of miles to see them, yet standing just a foot away, I felt so far from them. At the same time, I was glad that they were being so well taken care of by the museum and held on for posterity. Thousands of years had passed since potters had turned their wheels to produce these pots, and yet there they were, right in front of me, to enjoy and study. Now, over 30 years have passed since my experience at the National Museum, and I've traveled to many, many other places to study art and culture. But my yearning to touch the things I see has not passed. And in fact, the pandemic, when we could not travel at all, only amplified this desire. A couple of years before the pandemic, I led the effort to build an online repository of born digital art, literature, and games, what we eventually built into a virtual museum and library called The Next. Along with the digital files we were archiving and curating came many, many boxes of physical archives that were also donated. Objects like artist notebooks, flyers announcing artist readings, floppy disks containing their art, and even a beach ball they used in their performances. Among these boxes were some amazing historical artifacts dating back to the mid-1980s when computers were just starting to be used to make, these really great artistic things. What constitutes the beginning of our digital history. And I thought people would find this type of thing very interesting, just as I did the pots of Greek prehistory. So in the start of 2020, my lab, the Electronic Literature Lab, began to create 3D models of some of these artifacts and featured them at the Next on a space we ended up calling the visualization space, or Viz space. This means when people visit the space on the web, they can manipulate the models in the browser, turn them around in their hands, and read the words, see the images, and even the cracks and chips on the entire artifact the models represent. The idea we were trying to, shoot for was providing the opportunity for visitors to interact with these artifacts. But frankly, interaction wasn't enough. Even though we could simulate the experience of handling objects, we couldn't build a sense of immersion, which I see as a better way to understand things. Immersion, you see, suggests being submerged into something. It means to be inside of it. Immersion helps us to go beyond the border of reality and lose that feeling of separation with a thing by closing the gap of space between it and us, between the real and the unreal. It makes the experience feel immediate, helping us imagine a 3D model as something more than just a reproduction of an artifact, but rather the artifact itself. Now, immersion can be created in many, many ways, but what we chose for the artifacts in the Viz space was virtual reality, or VR. So a year ago, we began programming the Viz space so that anyone, anywhere, with a Quest 2, 3, or Apple Vision Pro can put on their headsets and immerse themselves in the space with the artifacts. In that VR environment, a visitor living here in Huntington, West Virginia, can, for example, experience John McDade's chocolate box of death that holds his sci-fi mystery hypermedia novel, Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse. Now, this black box contains clues for solving the mystery: 5 floppy disks, 2 music cassettes, a short story for Vortex magazine, and a letter from the editor of Vortex magazine, and, of course, a user's manual. Using their hands, visitors can interact with the music cassettes packed in the box, turn the box around, read the words on the floppy disk, and inspect the wear and tear of the box itself. Another artifact that speaks to what we think of as historic digital art is Dene Larsson's handmade pinwheel that she created in the mid-1990s to teach people, especially those who did not have much experience with computers, about interactive digital poetry. Visitors to the VisSpace can hold the pinwheel in their hand and with the other hand turn its blades, reading the lines of poetry that appear as the blades turn. Both of these artifacts are precious to those of us working with digital art, literature, and games because they speak of a time when artists were pioneering ideas and techniques that today we take for granted, but was at the time considered strange and new. For many of us working in this area of study, we hope that these artifacts will be as important to future generations as the ancient Greek pottery was to me. I should mention that all the code that we produce for this project is open source, and so available for anyone to download and create their own interactive digital artifacts for VR. I think about the advantages of using VR for experiencing artifacts in a museum or library. I could not imagine teachers able to take their students to the National Museum in Athens to see pottery they're studying in their class. The cost alone would be prohibitive, except for the wealthiest of school districts. But I can imagine a teacher asking their school to purchase a refurbished headset for $250 and having their students enter in a VR space to experience the Neolithic pottery held by the museum recreated as 3D models. That seems totally possible to me. I also imagine that libraries and museums that offer some of their artifacts to the public as VR and augmented reality experiences, cultivating young patrons who cut their teeth on Pokemon Go and games and meta like Beat Saber, right? And so are not just familiar with extended reality, but actually prefer these kinds of experiences. And finally, I can imagine that even when I was standing in front of that case of pottery 30 years ago, how helpful it would have been if I could have donned a headset right there in that museum and interacted with the very pot that fascinated me the most, touching it and looking at it as much as I wanted. Thank you so much. Thank you.